Welcome to Hello Irlandia. This week I continue my conversation with two representatives of Health Freedom Island. Together with kinesiologist Meave Murran and homeopath Kelly Johnson, we will dive deeper into all things health, vaccines and COVID-19 pandemic, hoping to provide our listeners with some interesting insights and food for thought on medical freedoms. There have been some concerns regarding the expected COVID-19 vaccine and the inherent risks involved in fast-tracking such a vaccine. We know that there are many pharmaceutical companies working on it at the minute, like Moderna or University of Oxford, GlaxoSmithKline, Johnson & Johnson, to name just a few. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, those concerns are actually very real, Kasia. And to understand the concerns, we need to look at how vaccines come to market normally and what a vaccine actually is. So normally a vaccine, as with any medicine, takes several years to come to market. No vaccine is actually subjected to the same rigorous safety standards as other pharmaceutical medicines. And vaccines are actually deemed to be biological medicines or are called biologics. So a biological medicine is either produced from a living organism or contains components of a living organism. And their purpose is to modify or change the way our body's cells operate. And by altering our cellular response, they have the potential to cause unwanted effects as well as the targeted effect. And these unwanted effects are called side effects or adverse effects. There's an equal chance of them happening, they're just not the targeted effect. And these unwanted effects or adverse effects can include such serious reactions as encephalitis, which is brain inflammation and swelling, to other life-altering injuries, which can even include death. Most vaccines have not been tested for their effects in pregnancy, on the developing fetus. Their effects on fertility have not been established, and nor have they been tested for their carcinogenic properties, or can they cause cancer, or the effects of, and nor have they been tested for their mutagenic effects, which would be their ability to change a person's DNA. All vaccines actually come with a manufacturer's information or patient information leaflet, otherwise known as a PIL, PIL, and these information leaflets list the adverse effects at the time of the introduction of the vaccine, and they're later modified to include the side effects that are reported and only come to light post-market, as in when it's been used by the masses in society. So if a vaccine is fast-tracked, then we won't actually know any of the adverse effects. So they won't be on the list. There'll be no list telling us them. The current vaccines being rushed to market are not being tested against a true inert placebo. They're being tested against a comparator, such as another vaccine. And the reason we use an inert placebo is so that we can see all the effects of this biological medicine that is being tested. So if we test it against a comparator vaccine, for instance, the adverse effects will be lost because this comparator vaccine may also produce that same adverse effect. It is also of particular concern that the drug companies are seeking indemnity from governments for their biological medicines. This means that should a person suffer an adverse effect, they can't actually seek any recompense or compensation from the pharmaceutical company. It also means that the pharmaceutical company actually has no incentive to reassess or improve on their vaccines. Currently, on the current situation about fast-tracking a vaccine for the current coronavirus, we have many scientists speaking out about the risks of rushing a vaccine to market, and these include people like Dr. Paul Offit and Dr. Hotez, and these are doctors who would normally be very vocal in their support of vaccines. There are also particular challenges associated with developing a vaccine for any coronavirus. In previous attempts where they've tried to get a vaccine for other coronaviruses, they've come up against an effect called vaccine enhancement. And what this means is that a candidate receiving a vaccine has a heightened response when they subsequently meet that coronavirus later in life after the vaccine. And it results in a severe reaction which can include death. It's important to note that in the previous attempts, all these vaccines never made it past the animal testing process. And this is one of the processes that will be removed if a vaccine is fast-tracked. So this safety barrier will be gone. We have seen that in fast-track vaccines before that the results have not been so good. And recently in Ireland, we've had the court case of Aoife Bennett. Aoife suffered from narcolepsy as a result of the H1N1 vaccine, Pandemrix. And this resulted in the Irish government settling the case for millions, since they had actually given the manufacturer of that vaccine full indemnity for liability prior to encouraging Irish citizens to take this vaccine. And they also knew at the time the Swedish health authorities had been warning about possible adverse effects, and they still went ahead and gave indemnity.
Judging by what you have just said, it seems to me that vaccines do not really fall into one-size-fits-all category medical interventions. Would you agree?
I would. I think they're being used as a one-size-fits-all medicine, but they don't, because we don't take into account an individual's genetic makeup, which could predispose them to an adverse effect. For instance, it's now known that there's a group of individuals who, due to their genetic makeup, cannot methylate, which means dispose of or clear out of their body, the toxins that are in the vaccines. And this group is a vulnerable group. And they also have equal rights to the protection of our society that is offered to other vulnerable groups. And they shouldn't have to suffer adverse effects by being given a vaccine.
In this case, Maeve, freedom of choice should be allowed, shouldn't it?
Absolutely, Kasia. I mean, freedom of choice, I think Health Freedom Ireland considers it's imperative. It has to be allowed. If we review the ever-increasing HSC childhood vaccination schedule, which is now 30 plus doses of 14 vaccine antigens in the first 13 months of a small child's life, none of these have ever been tested in combination. I mean, there's no science to back up any of these vaccines being tested together and how they affect a small child. You know, even the peripheral ingredients in them, we've no idea how they affect a developing child's brain or body. And when a child's in an early growth phase, would a child or a small baby be assailed by so many viruses and neurotoxic ingredients? I mean, I don't think they would be. And it's a huge cause for concern. The type of ingredients I suppose I'm speaking about here are things like aluminium. It's used as an adjuvant to promote an immune response, and when it's injected into the body via muscular injection, and it's very important here that we make the difference between aluminium that's ingested through the mouth as against injected into the bloodstream, so, or at least into the muscle of the arm of a small baby. So other toxic ingredients that come into play here would be things like formaldehyde. I know it's also used to embalm dead bodies. When you think about that, it's not very pleasant. Polysorbate 80, which is used in chemotherapy drugs and can cross the blood-brain barrier. And of course, the use of live aborted fetal DNA. And this is a big one for a lot of people. I mean, many of us have serious moral reservations about the use of live aborted fetal DNA in vaccines. If we look then at the USA, and review their vaccine schedules, I believe they currently have 70 plus doses by the time their children are 18 years of age. And currently in America, they have a chronic illness rate of 54%. Also, their vaccine injury compensation program has paid out over $4 billion in compensation to people injured by vaccines. I mean, this is very hard to believe because it's all done very quietly behind closed doors. As mentioned previously, none of these vaccines have ever been tested in synergy. So there is actually no peer-reviewed scientific data on how their cumulative and combined interaction might affect, again, a child's growing body or brain development. And we should also add here, at the moment, we have no vaccine injury fund in place in Ireland for any injury claim made by a member of the public who's supposed to take part in the vaccination programme recommended by the HSE. So therefore, in the case of indemnity provided to any vaccine manufacturer, if multiple cases of injury occurs, there is no option for a group of Irish citizens to take a class action against such a company. I mean, if you think about that, according to Irish law, this means that anyone who believes he or she was injured by a vaccine and is supported by medical documentation for such a claim is actually left on their own. And left on their own to challenge the system and to seek compensation. It's a very onerous situation to find yourself in. And even if we look back at this recent case of narcolepsy, which Kelly's already referred to with regard to Aoife Bennett and the swine flu pandemics, we know that there's still hundreds of cases outstanding in the Irish courts. So our belief is essentially where there is risk, there must be choice. And I say that again, where there is a risk, there must be choice. And I will say that again, where there is a risk, there must be a choice. The lack of informed consent towards medical interventions and experiments, with its tragic consequences at times for humanity, has been very well documented throughout our recent history and was the reason for creating the Nuremberg Code and Declaration of Helsinki, making informed consent a founding stone for medical research and the physician's ethical duties. So again, there must be choice, Kasia.
This is really a fascinating insight on vaccines and their potential risks and how the relevant policies may impact our right to freedom of choice and protection of our bodily autonomy enshrined in the Irish Constitution. Coming back to the current pandemic, we have been recently presented with the roadmap by our authorities, which seems to take a long and cautious route out of the impasse well into August. What do you think should be the exit strategy from the COVID-19 lockdown? How, in your opinion, can we achieve that?
Yeah, Kat, it's a very important question, and one we in HFI, are looking at. And while the response we accept of the government has been taken with the best interest for a vulnerable group within our society, it now needs to be re-examined, definitely re-examined based on the science that has recently emerged. I mean, the lockdown was implemented on a computer model, but this has been shown to be inaccurate, and in fact, it was never even published or peer-reviewed. In other words, it wasn't science-based. So the test itself is looking for viral RNA, and so is only positive during active infection. It doesn't highlight if one has immunity due to previously having had the virus. And people with conditions such as cancer are actually missing out on appointments. Others who need diagnostic procedures such as endoscopies, and other types of tests are not having them. Therefore, they're depriving them of early treatment. I mean, the lockdown in itself is also creating huge isolation and loneliness for many. And we're already hearing of cases of serious depression, mental health issues, alcoholism, abuse and violence as well within families and in homes. So what is being reported from those working on the ground is that many deaths may be due to this actual lockdown itself. And I think the fear that has been generated around this virus means that many are not seeking medical attention for other health conditions when they actually need to. They're afraid to go to their hospital lest they catch the virus or take up the doctor's time when that doctor should be dealing with the virus patient. I mean, it's really tragic. Many doctors now are actually advocating for the opening back up of society and allowing natural immunity to take place, especially as it appears that many of us have already contracted this virus. I mean, I've heard many people saying it, they felt they had it before it was even made aware of it here in Ireland, and they were either asymptomatic or only mildly affected. Indeed, some societies didn't even lock down, and their death rates, they're as much on par with those who did. So I feel it's very important to emphasise that a healthy immune system can really deal very effectively with most viruses and bacteria, and therefore it would be advisable to eat a healthy diet with plenty of whole foods, with as wide a variety of colour as you can access, and to make sure that all nutrients you have are available to the body. I think particularly in times of stress, supplements are a great way of boosting the immune system, as the body will use up the vitamins and minerals faster at these times, and really very much faster at these times. So for instance, take into account vitamin C will support the function of our immune cells. Good quality multivitamin is crucial, and mineral supplements will help support all the body's cellular functions. So I feel, and I think HFI people feel, that by ending lockdown, people will start to seek medical advice again for other health issues besides just this one coronavirus, COVID-19. If a person displays symptoms, they need to be mindful of others, of course. They must seek their doctor's opinion. They must stay at home and really only return to work when they're 100% better. I think that's absolutely, has to be driven home. But I think most people know that already.
Kelly, I have a provocative question for you. A famous businessman and philanthropist, Bill Gates, was interviewed about the vaccine against going back to the normal life issue on Easter Sunday morning on BBC. He said, and I quote, "Only by having 7 billion doses do we solve the problem." And he goes on, "People like myself and Tony Fauci are saying 18 months. There will be a trade-offs, we'll have less safety testing than we typically would have. Governments will have to decide, do they indemnify the companies and say, let's go out with this? We'll write checks for those factories faster than governments can." And he went on mentioning money unlimited, full speed ahead, science limited. What would you say to such statements?
Well, I think it's really interesting, and there's several points that I'd like to make about it. The first one would be that we have to remember that Bill Gates is a businessman. He's not a healthcare expert, nor is he a doctor. And what many people may not be aware about is that he has funded many of the organizations that people think are giving governments independent advice. And these include the World Health Organization and the Royal Imperial College, where the computer model came on which this lockdown is based. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation also lists approximately 69 different organizations that receive money from their organization. 46 of these are healthcare-based organizations, and 30 of them specialize in the production, manufacturing, and distribution of medicines and vaccines. So companies like Merck, Pfizer, Eli Lilly. Then the other companies that they fund are in the media. So you have them funding the BBC, on which platform Bill Gates was giving this talk. And in that interview, Bill Gates also said something, and I'll quote it. He said, "We did not simulate this. We didn't practice. So with both the health policies and economic policies, we find ourselves in uncharted territory," end quote. Well, actually, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation co-hosted an exercise in October of 2019 called Event 201. And they co-hosted this with the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, the Bloomberg School of Public Health, and the World Economic Forum. And in this event, they simulated a global pandemic of a coronavirus that was transmitted from bats to humans. This simulation also analyzed the health impacts, the economic impacts, the lifestyle impacts, and the trade fallout from the virus. And this simulation was just months before our current situation. And in that simulation, the people who participated were world elites from the global businesses, government, and public health. And they were partaking as exercise players. So personally, I find it very concerning that having hosted this event, Bill Gates went on the BBC and said, "We did not simulate this, we did not practice this," when clearly he did exactly that. And it also follows that he and those who attended the meeting and funded this event, and remember governments were involved, are clearly not in uncharted territory regarding health policies and economic policies. I find it also really concerning that Bill Gates, as a businessman with vested interests in vaccines, is calling for mandatory vaccination of every human being on this planet with a fast-tracked vaccine that he wants indemnified. And lastly, it's really concerning that a private individual exerting such a huge degree of influence over healthcare and policymakers is doing this, and there's no mechanism in place by which that influence is held to account. So I have many concerns over what he said.
Kelly and Maeve, thank you very much for coming on the show and talking to me. We have touched on very important issues regarding our freedom of choices pertaining to health and well-being. Your insight was really valuable and thought-provoking, and I wish you all the best with your organization. I understand that more info can be found on your website, healthfreedomisland.com, correct?
Yes, thank you, Kasia, so much for having us. It was great for getting this opportunity to be able to speak out, and thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Kasia. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.